I think right now, more than anything, the Texans are going to need a little bit of experience in the offensive coaching room. Which is why it's very interesting that they interviewed this guy. Syracuse football offensive coordinator, Jeff Nixon. I never thought, as someone who went to Syracuse for school, I never thought I would see Syracuse offensive coordinators getting head coaching interviews. And I know that Doug Marrone was the coach of the Jaguars for a little bit, but a Syracuse offensive coordinator of a 10-win Syracuse football team. When I was in school, they were so fucking terrible. First game I went to was Syracuse-Washington on a Friday in 2007, and Washington skull-fucked them up and down the field. It was rough. At least fans showed up for that game. They didn't really show up for any games the rest of our time on campus, even though they did win a bowl game the last year. Jeff Nixon was part of a Syracuse offense that was in the ACC and had, in Kyle McCord, a very talented quarterback transferring from Ohio State into his program. But I think Syracuse did a hell of a job this year, and just take a look at their passing game and what he was able to do with McCord. At the very least, having a conversation with Jeff Nixon, I think, is a win for the Texans. Because I want to pick this guy's brain about getting the ball out quick. Sam Warren of the Houston Chronicle, who also is a Syracuse guy, shout out to Q's, brought up that C.J. Stroud had the fourth highest time to throw in the NFL this year. 2.97 seconds. Kyle McCord, at the college level, was fifth in times to throw, 2.4 seconds. I mean, it's totally different, the NFL versus ACC football. But Syracuse's offense was purring this year. Most of McCord's attempts, per Sam Warren, nearly half were between 0 and 9 yards. They came over the middle, where Stroud has been effective in his NFL career, and they would set up deep shots when Syracuse threw it deep. McCord was one of the best quarterbacks in college football on passes of 20-plus air yards. He was 41 of 78 for 1,273 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. That was what C.J. Stroud was good at once. Stroud was not very good at that this past season. Definitely hurts to not have a good offensive line, have slow developing plays, to have your wide receiver core get injured. There are definitely some reasons as to why the offense took a bit of a step back. McCord faced a lot of pressure in this offense, but Syracuse was throwing a lot. 4 players with 50-plus catches, 5 with 500-plus receiving yards, including one of their running backs. And I look at this McCord offense, and I feel like it could work. I think it's very funny that Sam brought up McCord's 172 pressures in 13 games were the 5th most in the country, a 26.9% pressure rate. C.J. Stroud was pressured 39.4% of his 701 dropbacks this year. That is fucking nuts. That number? So, this Jeff Nixon offense at Syracuse were towards the top of college football in yards after the catch. We're towards the top of college football in third down percentage, towards the top of college football in red zone touchdown percentage. I don't know that Jeff Nixon's going to get the gig. I just think that's a good guy to interview. I still think that the Rams passing game coordinator, Nick Caley, is probably the front runner to be the next Texans offensive coordinator. I say that because he's been interviewed before by the Texans for the offensive coordinator role before they gave it to Bobby Slowik back in 2023. Also, he has ties to Nick Caserio. So it does seem likely, but if I'm the Houston Texans, I'm going to be very careful about who I bring in next as offensive coordinator if he is not somebody who's coached before. I need a past play caller. I need someone with pelts on the wall. If you've watched my live stream, you would have noticed that on Friday, when we talked about Bobby Slowik being fired, that I thought it's rather unlikely that Chip Kelly would give up a very cushy gig at Ohio State to be the Texans' next offensive coordinator. But after a story that Lance Zierlein told on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 in the morning with John Granado on Monday, I feel like it's going to be really important that the Texans bring in somebody who has been there and done that. I don't think you can have somebody who is, I guess, green. Why do I say that? Well, take a listen to this clip from the bench on, what was the day? How did I forget the day already? On Monday, here is Lance Zierlein laying out what he had heard about Bobby Slowik.
I told you guys the story about he and maybe you didn't hear me. He and Bobby Slowik had a run-in before the draft. So what happened was, I'll tell you the whole thing now that Slowik's gone. C.J. Stroud came to visit the Texans, and Bobby Slowik was telling them, okay, they were watching stuff on tape. Now, before I tell you this, when C.J. was at Ohio State, he really didn't talk to the OC at all. That's not his guy. He didn't think he knew ball. This coming from somebody who knows C.J. intimately. He didn't think the offense coordinator was very smart. So he would only talk to Ryan Day. Ryan Day was the guy who had to communicate with C.J., which I didn't love that, honestly, before the draft process. And it played into some of my thoughts on C.J. in terms of coachability.
So, you hear that from Lance. Lance is very connected with NFL draft people. I do not think that Lance made that story up. I don't think he would bring that up. I'm seeing Laura Gar asking that on Instagram. No. Lance is very connected, and the story that we're about to play about his exchange with Bobby Slowik in a moment is something that, one, has been confirmed by some other people online. I saw Texans Cap said that he's heard the same story. It's the first time I'd heard it, but Lance had even brought this up earlier when it came to Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik, which he mentions there. But that first part of the clip where you hear that C.J. Stroud really only talked to Ryan Day and he didn't respect the offensive coordinator, I think that's a reason to make sure that you're bringing in somebody who's a celebrity coordinator. You need somebody who's known. Remember when they interviewed Cliff Kingsbury back in 2023? That's a known offensive coordinator, celebrity coordinator, and Chip Kelly is a celebrity coordinator. Can you lure him away from Ohio State? I don't know, but I think if we know anything about the Texans, these guys spend. They paid out David Culley's contract after they fired him. Did the same thing with Lovie Smith. Hell, they gave Bobby Slowik a raise after last season and then moved on from him. This is a team that I think more than in years past with Bob McNair running the show is willing to accept sunk costs and move on. You got to respect that. You might think Cal's goofy. You might think Hannah's a little bit too hands-on. I've heard some interesting things about the flagship's relationship with the McNairs. But I think that a team that is willing to spend should be respected, assuming they do it somewhat responsibly and stay relatively hands-off. But this is Lance continuing to talk about Bobby Slowik on John and Lance on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. You can catch that show weekday morning 7 to 10. And this is where shit gets juicy talking about Bobby Slowik.
He said he didn't know ball. Ryan Day's my guy. And so I'm going to listen to Ryan Day. And what I heard was that he didn't, like, his communication was with Ryan Day and not the offense coordinator. Okay.
Again, that goes back to, hey, Stroud, I think Chip Kelly, of all the candidates we've heard, makes the most sense. So spend some money. Throw some money at him. It's a cushy job to leave. He's getting paid around $2 million a year. That's a lot for coordinators. Are you willing to spend more? I would think that you would if you want C.J. Stroud to be the happiest he possibly can be here. And that's not bending over backwards to C.J. Stroud's whims. You shouldn't go that far like with Deshaun Watson and the Texans or like the Rockets and James Harden. But don't you want to bring in somebody who's going to make that guy happy? I think so.